talk about firms in competitive markets. So the first thing to know when firms are in competitive markets is effectively that firms are trying to maximize their profit, and firms can freely enter and freely exit. So the most important thing that you want to take away from that is really that firms are producing where their marginal revenue equals their marginal cost. And frequently you will also see marginal revenue represented by the price. In this case, the price on a particular graph or in a particular problem. So firms always want to produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Okay, so we have that down as kind of the starting point for understanding and determining where firms should produce. Okay, so why don't we take a look now at a graph? And specifically, we're going to take a look at a graph that is based on the kind of traditional model in a competitive market. So we're going to have the quantity in its normal location and the price in its normal location. So now what's going to be different is that this graph is not going to have a supply curve, and that's really important. So in this instance, the supply curve is going to be replaced with the marginal cost curve. And so why don't we draw that on the graph? So that is the marginal cost curve for a particular firm. So now let's draw the average total cost curve, also known as the ATC curve. So let's label that ATC. And we're also going to draw the variable cost curve. So let's label this curve the AVC. Okay, so now we have the points on our graph that we need to kind of begin our analysis. So first off, we need to determine where the marginal revenue is. So in most examples, they're going to set a marginal revenue for you. So I'm going to set a marginal revenue at this point. So this is going to be our marginal revenue line. So this is going to be marginal revenue, also known as MR. And so the firm is always going to produce where marginal revenue and marginal cost intersect. So in this case, the firm is going to produce at this point, and this point right here. So because of that, why don't we draw a straight line down so we can see the quantity? Okay, so now we know that this is the quantity, or let's label this Q1. So that is the quantity that the firm is going to produce in this example. And so the next piece is you'll want to look at the average total cost curve and the average variable cost curve. And so when you're looking at these curves, it's really important to know where they are in relation to the intersection point of the marginal cost and marginal revenue curve. Okay, so now that we're taking a look at these points, you'll notice that the average total cost curve and the average variable cost curve are below the intersection point of marginal revenue and marginal cost. So what does that tell us about the firm? And more importantly, what does that tell us about the firm's profits? So what that tells us about the firm and what that tells us about the firm's profits are effectively that this firm is profiting in this market, and it's profiting at this amount. So this line right here is effectively representing the profit. So this entire rectangle is how you would determine the profit for this particular firm. And so I'm going to label this point as well so we can actually come up with a formula to calculate that. So let's label this point P2, and that will allow us to effectively calculate the profit. Okay, so now let's calculate the profit. So profit or loss equals, in this case, total revenue minus total cost. So that's kind of the standard format for determining profit or loss. Okay, so now in our example above, this is the formula that we would use to calculate the profit or the loss. So let's take we know it's going to be a profit, so it'll effectively be profit equals, and in this case is going to be parenthesis MR minus P2 times Q1. So that's going to give us the profit, and that'll allow us to see how much profit this particular firm is earning. Okay, so we've calculated the profit, and we know from reviewing the graph that if the marginal revenue and marginal cost intersection point is above the average total cost, that means then that this firm is making a profit. So why don't we look at another example? And let's take a look at an example where a firm is actually losing money. So we will once again draw our graph, and we're going to keep it in the standard format. So we will have the normal price, normal quantity, and let's draw our marginal cost curve. Excellent. Okay. So we have our price, we have our quantity, and we have our marginal cost. Okay, so now we need to get our average total cost and average variable cost. Okay, so let's draw our average total cost. So this is going to be our ATC curve. And now let's take our average variable cost. So this is our average variable cost curve. Okay. So now we need the question to give us where the marginal revenue is going to be in this problem. So the question is going to tell us that the marginal revenue line is in this case going to be at this point. So this is going to be our marginal revenue line. Okay. So now the most important point is we're always going to determine where the MC line, so in this case, the line here, and the MR line, in this case, the line here, where they intersect. Okay, so now let's draw that point down, and let's label that point. So that's going to be Q2. So now we know the quantity of the intersection point between MC and MR. So now what can we tell about the graph from looking at the intersection point here? So this is our intersection, MCMR. This is our intersection quantity, Q2. But where is our average total and average variable cost curves? Well, we'll notice that they're actually above the intersection point. So what does that mean? Well, that means effectively in this case that the average total cost and the average variable cost is going to be greater than the marginal revenue line. So because of that, this firm is going to be losing money. And the amount of money they're losing can be determined by taking a line like this, so drawing up to the average total cost curve and drawing straight across to the price. And now we have a box, and this box represents the losses that this firm is incurring. And so another important point is that the intersection point between the marginal cost curve and the marginal revenue curve is actually above also, or should I say below, the average variable cost curve. So because it's below both the average total and average variable cost curve, this firm should shut down in the short run, because as it's operating, it's even losing money on its variable costs. So why don't we determine the formula that we can use for calculating the loss? So we already know the profit or loss formula. So in this case, it's going to be a loss. And in this case, let's say that the point that the intersection of the quantity 2 and the average total cost curve is, let's label that as P3. Okay, so now when we're looking at our formula, let's try to plug in those numbers and see what we can come up with. So in this case, we're going to have the loss, and the loss is going to equal the total revenue minus the total cost. So in this case, our total revenue is going to be MR, and because of that, we're going to have the P3 minus MR, and that's all going to be multiplied by Q2 for the quantity. So once again, a similar setup as the prior problem, but it's important to note that because this is a loss, this will come as a negative amount rather than the profit, which is a positive amount. Excellent. Well, I think we have taken a look at the losses and profits for both graphs, and importantly noting that the intersection point between the MC and MR curve on both graphs is always how we determine if a firm is making a profit or loss. And specifically, to determine if a firm is making a profit or loss, we look at the intersection of the MR and MC and MR and MC and look at that in relation to the average total cost curve. And that intersection point is the point where we are going to determine if the firm should shut down or if it should continue to produce, and if the firm is incurring profits, as in the case over here, or losses, as in the case over here.